You may be familiar with the term biohacking. Basically, biohacking is a DIY self-experimentation journey where you are the subject, the scientist, and the laboratory. Biohackers typically view health as a spectrum, and they pick up where traditional medicine leaves off. That is, biohackers aren't concerned so much with being not sick, or even with being healthy, as most of us think of that, but rather biohackers are in the constant pursuit of optimal health, longevity, and performance. Hello and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach, and my mission is to help you get into the best shape of your life, no matter your age, so you can show up in the second half of your life as the healthiest, strongest, most vital version of yourself. We have a great show for you today. Zora Benhamou is here, and she's going to share how we can slow down the effects of aging. But before we get to that, I want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Energy Bits. Energy Bits makes the purest algae available on the market. Chlorella and spirulina are two of the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. They're both algae and they've been consumed for centuries because of their amazing health benefits. You can improve your energy, focus, immune system, and so much more by incorporating these powerful superfoods into your daily routine. Energy Bits makes it easy and convenient to get your daily dose of chlorella and spirulina. I personally take spirulina every morning for its antioxidants, its omega-3s, and the 40 vitamins and minerals to help improve my energy and focus. And I also take their chlorella every evening for its super high chlorophyll and vitamins and minerals to help with my immune function, my recovery, and gut health. I recommend starting out with their Vitality Bits, which is their 50-50 blend of spirulina and chlorella. And you can find those over at energybits.com. And because you're a listener of this podcast, you can save 20% off your purchase when you use the coupon code SILVEREDGE at checkout. Again, that's energybits.com and use coupon code SILVEREDGE. That's SILVEREDGE all run together at checkout to save 20%. Okay, enough of that. Let's get on with today's show. My guest today is Zora Benhamou. Zora is a certified sports nutrition coach who has been researching all things biohacking for the past 20 years. She believes that while we may not be able to stop the aging process, we can slow it down with the right techniques to reprogram our bodies to try to avoid lifestyle diseases and improve our health span. I started our discussion today by asking Zora how she became an expert in the field of biohacking.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's a really long story because I'm already 51. So I'll try to give you the short version. So generally, I'm from LA, right? It's kind of in our DNA to be interested in health and wellness. And my mother died of breast cancer when she was only 57. And that kind of triggered me on, I gotta, be careful. This is my genetics. I'm doomed. And then when the whole mapping of the human genome came around, I realized that, wow, it's only 10 or 20% is genetics. And I've got maybe 80, 90% that I can control. It's diet and lifestyle. So I kind of delved into that world because of my mother and my worries. I was obsessed with cancer and oh my gosh, what can I do to avoid it? And I was relieved when I found out actually that, genetics is just loading the gun and epigenetics is pulling the trigger, and we can control a lot of things. And then, became a health coach and then realized I need to help more people. So I went online, created a website called Hack My Age. And now I am also a podcaster and I'm delved into the world of gerontology because I am concerned about aging and how we age and how to decelerate or at least not have accelerated aging as we continue on through our lifespan.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And I love that you start this journey with you lost your mother at a young age and you were concerned about being genetically doomed, right? You're thinking, oh my goodness, well, if this is in my genes, that's inescapable, right? Now, you said a couple of things in there. You said that our genes are maybe 10 to 20%. That's our genetics, right? That we can't escape. And then you said, well, the good news on that is that means there's 90 to 80% that's, you said, lifestyle dependent, and you used the word epigenetics. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about epigenetics and genetics and the role that has to play for us?
Sure. Yeah, that's the biohacker in me speaking. And I always forget, everybody's a biohacker. And it's very important we explain this because our genes are basically fixed, right? We have them. I mean, unless you go into gene editing, but we won't get into that. We were talking about your mom and your dad giving your genes, and that's what you got. That's the cards that you're dealt with. However, the genes, the way they behave or express themselves can be changed. And that's amazing. And so epi means over genetic, the genes. So these are like little switches that can be flipped on or off. So if you carry the cancer gene, well, that doesn't mean you're doomed for breast cancer. It means that you maybe have more predisposed to it rather than the next person. But that switch doesn't have to be flipped on. We want to keep that off. And then you have other genes that are anti-aging genes, and you want those to be anti-inflammatory genes to be flipped on. So we can manipulate these through lifestyle and our environment. Sometimes we can't escape our environment. So we need some of these hacks, these little biohacks to try to do some damage control.
Okay, that's a very good explanation of epigenetics and things that are in our control and things that aren't under our control. And to your point, it really doesn't do us a whole lot of good to concentrate on things that are outside of our control. But the good news is there's a lot more that's within our control in the lifestyle type manipulations, which we're going to get into here in a minute, that we can change to work in our favor, both to reduce risk and to increase the goodness, right? The pro-aging stuff and the anti-inflammatory stuff. So you had mentioned biohacking a little bit. And I suppose before we move on, let's define, what do you mean when you say biohacking?
Biohacking is actually kind of a new term for something that's been around for a long time. And generally it refers to a group of people called biohackers. And what these people try to do are these N of 1 experiments. They just experiment on your body. They will do some kind of intervention, whether it's some peptide therapy or it's just supplements or a simple fasting, right? Change in their diet. And then they will measure it through some kind of a device, a wearable, tracking everything on a piece of paper or in a spreadsheet. And then they analyze it and they say, hey, did this work on me or not? It's different in the sense that we're sort of tracking, analyzing, very analytical with our procedures. And then we make a change or not make a change, or we decide this works for us or not. And it's not about saying, hey, I fasted and now I'm in autophagy and everybody, should be fasting like me. No, it's very, very personalized. And so you're just experimenting on yourself. Your body is one big laboratory. And there you go. You just have to be your own scientist, exploring and discovering and finding out what works for you. And there are different levels of biohacking. There's what I always try to explain it like a pyramid. There's at the very bottom, there's that foundation. And those foundation is all the stuff that we know that's important, is your diet, exercise, sleep, and stress management, like all these things. Super important, community, purpose in life. And then the middle part would maybe be supplements and those things that you can buy online, or cream or something you slap on. And then the very top tier are the more advanced biohacks where you need a doctor's approval or some kind of help or guidance through a medical professional. And because you're kind of going a little bit further in the experimentation. So those middle and the top tiers, in my opinion, and with my experience, they don't work so well, or if at all, if you don't have the foundation. So, really we need to get those basic biohacks under control on the foundation there. And when that foundation is solid, wow, those middle and top tiers are like magic. So anyone who's talking about some kind of, supplement or whatever that's magical, just take a step back and say, okay, let me try the foundation first. Maybe I won't even need the supplement after that. And if you do, well, then try it, because that may just be the thing that moves the dial exactly where you need it to be.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of what you're saying there, having that foundation, because a lot of times, and I get it. Look, it's the thought of having a fat loss smoothie that's going to melt belly fat while I sleep is very, very appealing. Unfortunately, it's complete BS. But to your point, if we have this solid foundation, and you mentioned the big ones in there, right? It's going to be eat whole foods, so get your nutrition on point, get some sort of exercise routine in place, manage your stress, get proper sleep, have a good hydration strategy for yourself. Once you have all that in place, then the fun begins, right? Now I've got this healthy base. I feel great. Okay, what can I do to really optimize now, or to biohack, to your point? Now we get into where we can start playing with maybe that middle tier with some supplements and things like that. And I love that you had brought up the self-experimentation and the tracking and the analyzing and that constant self-experimentation. So now let's say a lot of us are wearing these Whoops or Oura rings, or even Fitbits and Apple Watches and things are giving us this data. Well, what do we do with it? Well, let's say I'm trying to really nail in my sleep and I want to see if, say, magnesium or CBD has an impact on that. Well, now I have a way of really objectively measuring that. I'll look at my REM and my deep sleep cycles and see if they change after a month of, say, supplementation, or going to the top of that pyramid. Maybe we consult with a physician and start with some peptide therapies and things like that. And I'm sure we'll pull some of this apart as we move on. But to your point, that foundation is really that's where we need to start. And unfortunately, most of us gravitate towards those towards the supplements and the sexier looking things, right? Yeah. Peptide therapy sounds fantastic, and there's a lot of amazing things happening there. But I think we probably need to back up a little bit and make sure we have our house in order before we get there, right?
Yeah, you mentioned something I think important in terms of the biohacking world, Ed, I didn't mention is the optimization. Very often these biohackers are already pretty healthy. They're just looking for that optimized health. And we look at our biomarkers, the range is a little bit differently. Like when you go to your doctor and they say you are in the range of, your blood work is in the range, you're fine, you're healthy. For a biohacker, if I'm in the normal range, that means I'm sick. Because the average American, say that's what we're looking at our ranges, is sick. So, have illness and they have these diseases where, okay, we can take medicine and try to prolong our life, but it's not giving a good health span, which is the number of years you live free of disease and full of vitality. So, biohackers' ranges in terms of blood work will be optimized or different, because we don't want to fall into the normal situation. I don't want to be normal. I want to be abnormal in our biohacking sense.
100%. Yeah. I just came from a physical this week with my doctor, and my doctor, knock on wood, I'm very blessed with my health, but I worked very hard at it. Right. And he said, well, what can I do for you? And I said, to be honest, I want to optimize my health. And I could tell that's not what most of his patients say to him. But you're right. Health is a spectrum from ill to not ill to healthy to optimal health, right? And to your point, I guess that's a good way of looking at it. The biohacker world really starts from healthy forward into that. I don't want to be not sick. I don't want to be okay. I don't want to be normal. I want to be abnormal in the sense that I'm on the other end of the bell curve of this extreme health. And what things can I do to move myself a little further over to the right on that extreme optimal health side, right? Yeah.
And it's also, a lot of it is prevention. We are all into preventative medicine, prevention. You think if you see me in my 20 capsules of supplements and all this stuff I take throughout the day, people are like, ooh, what are you, sick? You're taking all these pills. No, it's in fact, I'd rather be taking vitamins and supplements rather than medicine later on. So it is about prevention. Like, why do you even do this? And it's unfortunate, we always want to wait until something's broken and then fix it. And biohackers are a bit more just preventative. Let's keep the car well oiled and greased and try to make it last a little bit longer and run really well, so that during our lifespan, we don't live 20, 30 years of disease. We just have that very short period of disease and die very quickly.
Yeah. So you're talking about having this proactive as opposed to reactive health. And unfortunately, our healthcare system is not set up that way.
Yeah. I mean, our sick care system?
Our sick care system is a much better way of putting it, unfortunately. And you just referenced there health span versus lifespan, right? You want to talk a little bit about that? Because I'm not sure everybody understands what you mean when you say health span. And I think you're referencing that compression of morbidity, right? Let's pick that apart a little bit.
Oh, that's perfect. Compression or morbidity. We just had that in our gerontology courses. So you're on it. Yeah. So lifespan, and it's true. Not most people don't know what health span is, but you can maybe figure it out. Lifespan is the number of years we live. And that's, we have plenty of data. I'm trying to guess what that would be. But health span is really the number of years you live free of disease and full of vitality. And as it is today, our health span is about 50. Right? We're living till about 50 in terms of health span. And then after 50 is when we start taking blood pressure medication and diabetes medication, and we start having these comorbidities, and we just have this 20 or 30 years, if you live until you're 70 or 80, of always medicating yourself, going to the hospital and being tired, and, all the stereotypical images we have of aging. And that's kind of a long time. If you're going to live till 70s or 80s, that's a long time to be sick. So what the goal is, especially for biohackers, are we try to extend that health span to our 80s or 90s. I mean, we're pushing, like, everybody's like, I'm going to live to at least 100, in our world. And we're not talking about 100 years of sickness or 50 years of sickness. We're talking about good health. And in my perspective, from what I've learned from my gerontology courses, I got to make some money, because if I'm going to live to 100, I won't be able to afford it, right? There's Medicare, Medicaid in the US. That's just not going to cut it for me. So, we need to not only think about, if you're going to say, I'm going to live to 100, well, let's think about, do you want to really, if everybody around you is dead or all your friends are gone? So, and the other part is, are you going to have energy? Are you going to have good health? Do you have purpose in life? And the other thing to consider is do you have enough money to live a long life? That we just, kind of assume that we're going to have all of those things, but the real world is very, very different.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. There is more and more conversation amongst people our age even of living to 100. And I hear some younger generation people that are in this biohacking space. I'm going to live to, my mission is to live to be 120. And if you think about that and the implications there certainly are financial implications. So if I live to be 100 years old, well, just working till I'm 60, which is a couple of years away from me, and then retiring, that's a whole lot of life to live. That's another 40 years. I'm going to have to support that somehow. And so being healthy and well and vital to be able to not just work to provide money, but also to fulfill myself, my spirit, my soul, right? And to do the things that I'm passionate about and share those things. So yeah, I absolutely love that. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Jonathan Sullivan. He wrote a book called The Barbell Prescription along with a guy named Andy Baker, but he has this idea of a sick aging phenotype. And that's where I first heard that term, compression of morbidity. And he talks about, he has these fictitious twins, and one takes care of themselves and does all these things, has amazing health. And the other one does the exact opposite, right? And so one lives until he's 90, and then, his ticker goes, and a couple of days later, he's gone. But the other one starts that death cycle at about age 35 or 40 with obesity and high blood pressure and dyslipidemia, just all these chronic conditions, right? And they continue to get worse and worse. And now they've got a whole grocery bag full of pills and medicine that they're taking and it's not a pretty picture. And that morbidity cycle is stretched out so long. And to your point, if we can really compress that and have that healthy health span and enjoy ourselves much later, that certainly is a more desirable outcome than that sick aging sort of phenotype that we see all around us, unfortunately. And that's the common narrative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, Zora, you mentioned the word gerontology several times here. Let's talk about gerontology. What is gerontology?
So gerontology is the study of aging, and all through the life course. It's not just studying older adults, but we look at it from not only a biological perspective, which is what we all seem to be doing in the biohacking world, but also from a psychological and a sociological perspective. So we're understanding why people are having disability or mental illness or, physical deterioration based on their socioeconomic factors, based on the stress their mother had when she was pregnant, or, so many factors are playing into why we're living a long life that's healthy or a short one full of disease. So we do need to take a look at, and we combine all three of those perspectives and combine it to have some, that's what we study and try to figure out what can we do about it.
It's interesting that you talk about gerontology, because when I think of gerontology, I think primarily of aging, meaning older aging, but that's a good point. So you're going to look at this perspective of aging across the entire lifespan of the human. How is studying gerontology, because you've been into biohacking for quite some time, how has the study of gerontology really impacted what you're doing in the biohacking space?
Oh, definitely brought more perspective in terms of the sociological and the psychological impacts on our physiology, but also understanding older adults much better in their needs. I'm as a biohacker, I'm 51, but I feel like I'm 31, or I look like I'm 41. I'm far from experiencing what the average 70 or 80-year-old woman is experiencing. I don't even think about it. I mean, it's not on my radar, and that's really not good. I mean, that's what, gerontologists do, is we need to consider these people. And in fact, I was shocked that, there are very, very few studies done on people over the age of 80. Just, they're not done. You're like, well, why not? Because they're an important population. And so I understand much better their perspective, their needs. And in the biohacking community, I'm leading the women over 50 group, and I'm showing that biohacking women over 50, I'm talking about 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, we have different needs, different concerns, we can't biohack like a 35-year-old man. I mean, it's not working. So, and we're not even interested in some of those things that those guys are into. So we're worried about gray hair and hormone loss and menopause and, saggy skin and, it's just, or loneliness, social isolation, kids leaving home. These are all things they're vision loss, hearing loss, frailty, hip fractures, and just people don't really talk about that. But there are hacks for this, and there are things that we can do, especially in terms of the prevention side, to have better outcomes as older adults and have a better life, but also less burden on society, because society, that's why we're so ageist, is because we look at older adults as costing so much money. They're taking all the social security, and they're taking all of the Medicaid, and they're costing too much money, and all their time that caregivers give for their parents or grandparents or in-laws. We don't want to be a burden. At least I don't want to be a burden. So we got to hack our age before we get there. And there's so many things we can do. So I totally lost track of the question, but just going on.
No, I love where you're going here, because that leads perfectly into what I really want to dig into. So I think you're dead on that we need some of these aging hacks. And look, what the 30-year-old guy is interested in, or gal for that matter, really is probably, to your point, doesn't really apply to the 60-year-old biohacker, right? So what are some of these health hacks that we can use to slow the aging process, and what can we do you had talked about making better outcomes for ourselves as we age. What are some of these hacks? I know that you like to talk about 5 pillars. Is this a good time maybe to dig into some of that?
Yes, the 5 pillars are the foundation of that pyramid that I told you about. Going back to
our foundation.
Absolutely. If you can do the foundation, you're like 95% of the way there. That's it. Really, it's so important that we get my first pillar, there's no order to this, because I have 5 pillars plus 1. The 1 is extra, but the first 5 are absolutely necessary to have long health span and to, shorten that, compression of morbidity. So we want to get The first one I always work on, especially when I was doing more health coaching, is sleep. I'd say 80% of the women who came to me wanted to lose weight. 80% of them after their health analysis just needed to go to bed. Like, just go to sleep. Make sleep a priority. And so sleep is, for me, the magic bullet. Like, if I told you something if there was a pill that you could take that made your brain super sharp, that you gave you lots of energy, made your skin look awesome, and, help you lose weight, like, you'd be all over it. Like, I'm paying, well, no matter what, all money for that. And that magic bullet is sleep. I mean, it's free, right? So we just need to prioritize that. And the second pillar is, I call it relax. Right? Go ahead.
Actually, hang on. Before we get to the second pillar, because I want to pull apart sleep a little bit. This is one of my favorite subjects. And like you, 90% of my clients are coming to me for weight loss, and they're really surprised on weekly check-in calls when I spend more time talking about sleep and your second pillar that we're going to get than I do about their nutrition or their exercise, frankly. And you had mentioned that sleep is the magic bullet. I'm 100% with you. Sleep makes everything better. And I'll occasionally get that person that says, no, 5.5 hours sleep is all I really need. No, it's not. No. Unless you're that 0.00001% outlier, that is not the case. If you got 8 hours of sleep, you would be functioning at a much higher level. So what are some specific tips that we can give our listeners when it comes to improving their sleep?
Well, first of all, you have to make that commitment that you're going to make it a priority, right? And a lot of people tell me, I want to start my morning routine like this. It's my dream morning routine. But their morning routine has to start with their sleep, right? And sleep goes hand in hand with stress. And so really a lot of people that I work with are stressed out and they can't sleep because of the stress. And then you add on menopause onto that, and then there's a whole other bag of worms. So the hacks for women may be different from the hacks for men, but definitely make that a priority. And then you create a sleep hygiene. It's so basic. So that is the foundation. And that's turning off your electronics an hour before you go to bed, keep the lights dim in the house, don't have negative conversations, don't pick up the phone if you're going to have a fight with your mom. I mean, really, these kinds of things are so basic. I like to turn my bedroom into a spa. So before I go to bed, I put in a little lavender, essential oils, I don't know, or something wafting in the room. I close the door. I put on that sleep music on Spotify, just Google sleep music. and then and when you hear those things and the lights are dim, it reminds you of when you had a massage the last time, if you ever had a massage, and you remember walking into that spot and your brain literally is triggered. Like, I remember that massage and I remember I fell asleep very quickly. So having a good relationship with sleep is super, super important. Having your room like a spa is one of my easiest tips. And then if you can't sleep because of stress, then that's, we got to, there's other things that we can do then for that.
We're going to move on to your second pillar there. Yeah. So I agree with all that. I think you had called it sleep hygiene. I'd say have a sleep routine. Do the same thing every night. To your point, you turn your room into so you're going to, what's going to trigger me is I'm going to turn off the electronics. I'm going to put on some essential oils, maybe put some music on. And this is going to trigger my body that, okay, now it's time to relax. It's time to get ready for sleep. I like to have the same bedtime and wake time all week long, right? Most of us are pretty good on that Sunday through Friday, and then we mess it all up on the weekends. So certainly sleep and stress go hand in hand. So we said pillar number 1 is going to be sleep. Give me some good tips there. Pillar number 2 is stress. And this is the other great big one, right? In this foundation here. So talk to us about stress.
Well, before I talk about stress, I want to give you some little tips, a little bit more tips for the sleep, because the sleep,
Sure.
Everyone's heard of that, right? The stuff that we've talked about. And again, that's the foundation. You do that. Now, the other things you may not think about is, well, maybe you're sleeping with somebody who's snoring. And that's a huge problem. So there are things that you can do to hack that. Some people have a bedroom divorce and they are lucky to have another room, I guess, or if they like that works for them. I don't like to do that, but I have these little ear things. They're noise cancellation headphones, but you can use earplugs. You can use something that's not going to disrupt the sleep. If you're talking about a woman who's going through menopause or perimenopause, you want to think about progesterone. Obviously you talk to your doctor about hormone replacement, but progesterone helped so many women get to sleep. This is such a great little hack that a lot of people haven't even thought about, and it's so basic. So these are a couple of things that I want people to think about. And then the last one is spermidine. Have you heard of spermidine?
I have not, no.
Oh, okay. Spermidine. Okay. This isn't a supplement, this is in addition to the sleep hygiene. Okay. Remember, get that. But spermidine is a supplement that's been around. I mean, it's actually found in Japanese food. It's found in all foods, but very high concentrations in Japanese food and sperm, right? Thus the name spermidine. And right. This is an actually incredible supplement. If there was one I would say to take, it's pretty much this one. And the feedback I've been getting is incredible at how powerful this is. Most of the time people are coming back to me with great sleep, and people who are tracking their data on Oura Rings and BioStraps and stuff, they see their deep sleep scores are improving. There's a whole lot of other stuff that I'm not going to go into with spermidine that it does, but in terms of sleep, that's one thing I definitely would add to your regime, is a little stack onto getting the best sleep. So if you want that quick fix, but make sure you get the foundation first.
Right. Okay. Get those other things in order. And that's a great one. I'll have to look into the spermidine. And this is something that is a supplement you can buy.
Yeah. This is now, okay. It's kind of it's on the biohacking circuit. It's on the biohacking circuit because people are not encapsulating this, because it's, been around in natto. Like if you know what natto is fermented, sure. Soybeans, and it's having it encapsulated is quite easy and fast. And I take one called Primidine. I know that one because that's the one I've been using. That's what I've been recommending. That's the only one I would recommend, because that's the only one I know, really. All the other stuff, like any other supplements, 85% of it is garbage. And then you got to make sure you get the good stuff and do your due diligence with that.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Well, great. So we're getting some biohacking tips, right off the get-go here with our first pillar. So we had talked about sleep and stress going hand in hand. Talk to us about stress.
Yeah, I know. So you're not going to go to sleep if you're stressed out. And so this is another thing that we often work on with our clients, as I'm sure you as well. And it's a hard one. It's really hard because when you're right in the middle of it, who wants to meditate and who wants to breathe and, all this stuff. But it is the foundation. And I have to say, I did an incredible course in gerontology called the Mind-Body Connection. And I was blown away. That was the most useful and the best course I took in the whole program. And this is, I go to USC, which is the University of Southern California. It's a research-based university. This is not woo-woo stuff, they wouldn't include this in the curriculum. So I was so pleased to have this. And it really explained what is happening to the body physiologically when you have chronic stress. Okay. Stress isn't a bad thing. It's our response to stress, and having too much of this and too many stress hormones like cortisol and epinephrine, adrenaline running through our body constantly, that causes a problem. And you could have the best diet in the world and eating broccoli all day long and running a treadmill and doing your exercise. But if you have stress, it'll still kill you in the end. It's just too powerful. So that's why I always like to focus first on the stress and the sleep rather than the diet and the exercise. Like, we'll get to that. Just everything will fall into place when you get to sleep. And the stress is it's too powerful to ignore. So I think it's really important to manage the stress. It's not going away. Stress isn't bad. Make stress your friend. There are a lot of positive things to it, but it's that chronic low-grade inflammation that happens when we have chronic stress all the time. So this means taking a break. And women, especially around the age of 50, are so vulnerable to stress because we're very often in this sandwich generation. Do you know what the sandwich generation is?
Is that the generation that ate a lot of sandwiches?
Yeah. It's the sandwich generation. They are the women who are caught in between two generations. She's usually around the age of 50. She's taking care of older adults, older parents, people who are around her. Her parents are aging, and she may still have some kids at home that she's taking care of. Not small kids necessarily, but you're still managing your kids. And then if you add a job on top of that, this person is extremely stressed. And this is a caregiver, and caregivers are known to have the shortest telomeres, especially if you're caregiving a disabled child. So this is, and telomeres are related to your lifespan. There's an association of short telomeres and a shorter lifespan, but that's why, women in this category need to really take care of themselves, and they very often don't. And I try to give a prescription to my clients saying, you need a massage. Tell your husband you gotta go. Zora said it's part of my prescription, because you need this. In order to take care of the other people, you have to put yourself first. And women often do not do that enough. And it's a very serious thing because you cannot, and you cannot take care of someone else. Even in our gerontology courses, we're trying to be advocates towards doctors to look at their caregivers of their Alzheimer's patients. So you may have Alzheimer's patient, you got to look at them, make sure they're on track, whatever, give them their prescription. Then you need to turn around to the caregiver and look at them, because that Alzheimer's patient is not going to survive if the caregiver doesn't survive. And and has a lot of stress, is not, has no respite, nothing. It's really, really important that I stress that people take care of your stress and manage it. You can't do it all. And if you just take a step back, taking care of yourself, you'll be a better person and a better caregiver.
100%. I love that you brought that up, and I hadn't heard that term sandwich generation, but you're right. And this applies to men as well, but primarily women that are caregivers, right? And so to your point, they may be caring for elderly parents, and they are probably very likely still caring for children, even grown children, right? That's just kind of in that caregiver gene, so to speak. And I think that a lot of these people miss taking the importance of that self-care, of taking the time for themselves, right? They don't have time for that because these other people need them. Now, you add something like that older parent they're taking care of with Alzheimer or with a special needs child, and we have a recipe for that caregiver to just completely implode, right? But by them prioritizing self-care, by taking care of themselves in the ways that we're talking about, right? Prioritizing their sleep, prioritizing their own nutrition, their own exercise, their own mental well-being, they will show up as a much better everything, as a better caregiver to their parents, to their children. They'll show up as better coworkers, bosses, or employees, wherever they are in life, right? And I think that gets missed by a lot of this caregiver generation that is so intent on other people. And what a beautiful act of service, right? But if you really want to give your best act of service, I think the first thing we could do is take care of ourselves. Now, you talked about stress being a killer, and really what we're talking about is this chronic stress, because I think you started this whole thing saying, look, stress isn't bad. In fact, stress at once upon a time kept us physically alive. Well, unfortunately now, most of us don't have these acute stressors of physical danger, of being out hunting and a saber-toothed tiger coming around the boulder. Our stress is traffic, and it's these things that you're talking about. It's family situations and social situations and work and all of this. And it's this chronic, constant stress that's triggering this horrific downward spiral, biological spiral of inflammation and things in our body. What are some good tips for managing this stress? I know you brought up breath work a couple times, and you briefly talked about meditation. What are some hacking tips we can't control stress, but we can manage it? What are some tips to help us there?
Well, in gerontology, this course, though, they did a lot of interesting presentations on meditation and yoga, things like Qigong, lots of interesting data about music therapy for reducing stress. So music is quite a powerful impact on your heart rate. Your heartbeat will sync according to the tunes. So if you want to work out and have, run faster, listen to that music that pumps you up, right? But if you're stressed out, don't listen to that music. You want to listen to something like Beethoven or something. I love the sleep function on Spotify, and I use that for a lot of things. But so music is quite a powerful thing, actually, and that a lot of people don't really talk about. But because I'm a breathwork teacher, that I've gone through the Oxygen Advantage teachings, I'm all about breathwork. I think the breath is so foundational. Again, one of those things that's free. We just have to learn how to breathe functionally, because there's a lot of dysfunctional breathing out there that is increasing our anxiety and stress. And then that's doing some damage. Whereas we can literally in a few seconds lower the cortisol, which is our stress hormone. We can lower our heart rate, lower our blood pressure, just by using our breath. I mean, if you have these Oura rings and biostraps, you can measure it. Like it's unreal, and it's fascinating to see the data. I mean, you feel great, obviously, but it's interesting, as a biohacker, you just like the data. And so you see it really, really working, and you feel the difference. So breathing, learning how to breathe. There's so many YouTube videos out there. I'm right now giving free 15-minute breathwork breaks on Facebook on the Hack My Age page. And, you can just learn some basic techniques there. There's so many people like that doing these kinds of things. Really, I think it's functional breathing is different than just what you breathe in yoga class. Like you're there for an hour, maybe you do 10 minutes of breathing and then you're done. So what do you do the other 23 hours of the day? Like just go back to your normal breathing, right? So managing your stress through learning breathing techniques is super important, and lots of ways to do it. And the idea is just to give you, if you're like, well, what is it? How do I breathe? You want to slow the breath down. Okay. When you're thinking about when you are stressed, or if there's an attack, a panic attack, or you're stressed out, you're breathing like a dog. You have it open in your mouth. You're breathing through your chest. And you are in this stress state, your heart rate's going high, and you're breathing probably about 20, 25 times per minute, inhales and exhales. And the normal breath is about 15. And what we want to do when we're doing breath work is slow it down to 5 or 6. And that means inhaling gently, nothing, you don't need to take a deep inhale, fill your lungs full of air to breathe deeply. You'd breathe light. And that's just take a gentle inhale in, about 4 or 5 seconds, more or less, let's say slowly. And then you want to extend the exhale out. So if you need a number, let's just say 6, like inhale 4, exhale 6. Those are nothing magic, but that's just the idea, is to slow it down. So if you're counting 4, 3, 2, 1, well, let's slow it down to 4, 3, 2. And it's hard in the beginning, but what's happening is when you inhale, you're activating the sympathetic nervous system, which is your stressed out state, right? Your fight and flight. And so we don't want to have that too long, but we want to extend the exhale, because that's activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's your rest and digest and chill out. And when we're able to slow down the breath, we're building up carbon dioxide in the bloodstream. Now, carbon dioxide is a good thing, right? I mean, we always associate it like something negative. But when we keep it inside our bodies, when we're not exhaling, like, think about Wim Hof, or think about exhaling really fast. There's a purpose for that. And I'm not saying Wim Hof is not good. I'm just saying when you're in a stressed state, and there's times we want to stress our breath for a certain purpose, but in general, you don't want to be doing this all day long. You're exhaling all your carbon dioxide, so you're depleting your bloodstream from the oxygen. And what happens is when you have in your red blood cells, you have hemoglobin, and hemoglobin carries 98% of the oxygen in your blood. And when you are exhaling, in a panic state, breathing through the mouth, or even, exercising and you're breathing heavily, hemoglobin holds on really tight. There's a very tight affinity, a tight bond with oxygen. It will not let it go. But once those carbon dioxide levels build up in the bloodstream, and you get that signal in your brain like, I could take a deep breath now, that's when hemoglobin releases the oxygen into the bloodstream. So you are oxygenating the blood. So if you're talking about performance, athletic performance, well, you're going to be able to go longer, faster, harder, stronger, because you have more oxygen flowing through the bloodstream, right? So, but we can do this all day long if we want, through light, low breathing. And that's in a calm state. And you imagine when you are breathing slowly and you have that carbon dioxide buildup going into the bloodstream. That's, when the hemoglobin is released, but it's also when it sends a signal to the brain that, I should breathe. It's also stimulating the vagus nerve, which is the largest nerve in the body, running from the brain all the way down to the belly. And it's a main highway. It's the main nerve that's connected to all the other nerves. And those nerves are connected to organs. And so when the brain and the vagus nerve is stimulated, it's telling the brain, you're safe. It's cool. Like, we're chilled out. And that signal goes down to all the other nerves and all the other organs, telling the body that it's safe, it's okay, like we can relax. And that's when the heart rate comes down, blood pressure comes down. And when your heart rate and blood pressure come down, well, all the magic happens as well. So the idea is light, low breathing, and just get to that point. I kind of call it a ninja breath. Like, nobody should be seeing you breathing or hear you breathing. If you walk in a room and you hear somebody like, there's something dysfunctional with that. And I think it's about 70% of the population have dysfunctional breathing. And, so it's not unusual. And 50% of the people with lower back pain have dysfunctional breathing. So there's just so many things that I learned through Patrick McKeown and the Oxygen Advantage. He's very scientific in his approach to breath work, which is why I chose him. Found it fascinating. But I would say for stress, take those techniques, light, low breathing, calm down. And I know I just spoke so much, but I wanted to give people like that visual of how to breathe.
I think it's safe to say we take breathing for granted, right? It's something we all do. We do it automatically. We do it without thinking. But to your point, the way we breathe can trigger either that sympathetic or parasympathetic, that fight or flight, or that rest and digest, mellow out parts of our nervous system. And if we can train ourselves to make the default breathing some sort of a breathing that is going to put us more into that relaxed mode and bring us out of that chronic stress, that would be ideal. And so folks, I know that Zora had just mentioned she has some breathing videos on her Facebook, and I'll include all that into the show notes here, and you guys can find that there.
One thing I didn't mention that I think is vital in this breath work discussion is if there's one thing you take away from this podcast, it's breathe through your nose. Stop breathing through your mouth. Mouth breathing is over. The only time you breathe with your mouth, the only time you open your mouth is for food and talking and maybe a couple of things, but that's about it. So breathe through your nose. And I won't go into detail why, but please, you'll feel so much better when you do. And when you sleep and when you train, when you exercise, it's really hard to breathe only through your nose, but keep doing it. Keep trying it.
Yeah, having control of your breath is certainly can be important. I know certainly in doing CrossFit type workouts, things like that, a lot of time what will make or break a very intense workout is your ability to control your breathing and your heart rate. And you're not going to do that without practice, right? So it seems weird to say practice breathing, but there's a lot of benefits that would go into mastering your breath work. And I'll also drop in the show notes you called it the Oxygen Advantage program, right? Mm-hmm. Make sure that I put a link to that as well. All right. So we have stress. We have sleep, our first two pillars, and clearly those two are related, right? If I can reduce my stress, I'm automatically going to help my sleep, and vice versa. If I can improve my sleep, I'm going to improve my stress levels. And if I can improve my sleep, I'm also going to improve your next pillar, which is going to be nutrition, right? Talk to us about nutrition.
It's about food. Yeah. One thing I didn't mention. Okay. I keep going back because these pillars are so,
that's fine. No, let's do it.
So broad. The other thing I talk about in the Longevity Master Plan, this is the book I wrote. When we talk about relax and that stress part, I'm also talking about physical stress. And because your audience are fitness people, right? They're into exercise and you're getting injured all the time and there's always something happening. I really want you to take care of that physical stress. And it happens too often as we age. We get, aches and pains and we go, oh, that's just normal aging. No, it's common, but it's not normal. Okay. So take care of that hip that's bothering you, or that knee or that shoulder. Go see your acupuncturist or physical therapist. Spend the money on fixing it. Don't live with this chronic stress, this chronic pain. So I'm talking about physical stress as well. So we always fall into the mental stress, but physical stress will give you a lot of mental stress too if you don't take care of that. So I just want to mention please that.
No, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that, because you're exactly right. I think that the prevailing thought is, well, that comes with the territory and aging. I'm getting old, therefore my knees are achy. I'm getting old, therefore I've got this bad back. And it's just going to get worse because that's just what happens as I age. Absolutely false to your point. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of these folks will go to a doctor and say, my back hurts. Well, you shouldn't, or my knees hurt. Well, stop exercising or stop doing the thing that aggravates your knees or your back or your shoulder or whatever it is. Don't raise your hands over your head if your shoulders hurt, which is horrible advice. That what you need to do is, I guess, be your own health advocate and do that investigative research that we were talking about, figure out the cause of that and start working hard on the mobility exercise or whatever it is that's going to rehabilitate that. Because we talked about living to be 100. Well, living to be 100 pain-free is different than living to be 100 with constant physical pain, which is, to your point, is certainly going to negatively impact all of our other pillars, right? It's certainly our sleep and our stress level. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. All right. On to another one of my favorite topics. Let's talk about food.
Yeah, food is probably like the biggest pillar in my book, because it's just so broad. It's not about only what you eat. It's what you don't eat. It's when you eat and how you eat and, mindful eating, like all this stuff we could go on forever and ever.
Sure. Emotional eating. There's a lot that goes in to eating, right? Which
surprisingly happens still with women over 50. I'm like, are you still having eating disorders? Like where in the world did this, I was surprised when I found this out. I'm like, I can't, this has got to be resolved. You can't just be carrying for 50 years or 60 or 70 or how old you are with some eating disorders. So that needs to be fixed for sure. But when it comes to food, I wrote a book called Eating for Longevity, and it's just a cookbook. And it's not just a cookbook. I give all the details in terms of dairy, dairy, soy, soy, meat, no meat. Like what have I observed in all these aging populations and all the travel I've done and everything that I've learned. So I put it all in there. And so it talks not only about the recipes and stuff, but so much more. And I think, wow, I'm going to have to choose one thing because it's really, really hard to talk about food. I think the basics, we all know what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat, right? It's, if you could.
Well, I'll challenge you on that because as somebody who really geeks out and nerds out on nutrition, I think that the basics are everybody knows the basics. But I don't think we do. I just read something that said over 70% of the average American's diet is processed and ultra-processed food, and ultra-processed makes up the vast majority of that 70%. Yeah. And I think that there's people out there, everybody knows that probably a Pop-Tart's not healthy for you, but I think that there's a large part of the population, certainly in our generation, we grew up with the fat is evil, red meat can be bad, eggs, and people are still carrying some of this with them. I see older people selecting the margarine, the vegetable oil over the butter and things of this nature. And now the big thing is plant-based, and people are doing Impossible Burgers and these other highly manufactured foods, thinking that because they're being marketed as healthy for them. And I think that maybe the basics aren't well known, and the basics are simply eat real food, right? Is eat whole food, eliminate or reduce as much as possible the processed food. Yeah. Would you agree with that? Yes,
I was just about to say that, in the sense that, I personally think if you could get rid of the highly processed food, because when we talk about processed, okay, almond milk with just almonds and water, that's processed. Okay. I'm not talking about.
Yeah. Your pasteurized milk is processed.
Yeah. I'm not talking about that kind of processed. I'm talking about the highly processed stuff that needs to be eliminated or reduced significantly. And if you can do that, you're like 85% of the way there. Then don't talk to me about dairy, no dairy, eggs, no eggs. Like, I don't want to hear, I want to hear first, let's get rid of that.
Should I do intermittent fasting or not? Well, you know what? Fix that part before you worry about any of those other things, right?
Unfortunately, like if you look at people's shopping carts, and I live in Spain and Portugal and kind of all over the place, but I still, even here, I look at people's shopping carts. I'm like, wow, I prefer to go to the local market, the street markets, because they don't have that processed food, right? Although I do still go to the supermarket, I need processed food, I don't get the highly processed stuff. I try to get other things. It's impossible to be completely 100%, but that's what I mean when it's like, we know we shouldn't be doing that. And so if you could reduce that, you're really 85% of the way there. After that, my second thing is to really get to know who you are and what your body responds to. And as a health coach, and you probably seen this too, where people have a total disconnect with their bodies and what works for them and what doesn't. Sometimes I'll ask people, well, how do you feel when you eat X or Y? And they're like, I don't know. And it's, well, what about this? I'm like, I don't know. They don't know. So this is what I try to teach my clients is let's get to know our body. And I love to use the hacks, the biohacking tools like a CGM, continuous blood glucose monitor, for example. You wear this thing, you pop it on your arm, and it tells you, how much blood glucose you have running through your system in response to certain foods and to poor sleep or the stress that you have. It's amazing the data that it can give you. And it's not an expensive thing to do. And you can just do it for 2 weeks. It's only a 2-week thing. And you'll see, and I was shocked at how different people respond to different foods. I used to tell everyone, like, don't eat bread because that can raise your insulin level and blah, blah, blah. Or don't eat rice and don't eat, the high refined carbohydrates. But I realized, there's some people who can and some people who can't. And some people, you can hack it by adding certain other ingredients to it. And then you just realize, wow, I can't just telling people that anymore. I have to understand everybody's different. Everybody's got a different microbiome. Everybody's processing foods differently. Why can this same person, like practically the same, even some of the same family, same genetics, and they can't process the foods the same way? Yeah. So I would say really try to get to know what foods work for you and what doesn't, and stop telling everybody else what they should and shouldn't eat. Just worry about yourself and then don't go preach. Just find out what works for you. That's the one thing. And how do you do that? Well, you can either read a lot and study a lot, or you can get a health coach or, get some guidance with a nutritionist, but really get to know your own body, what can and cannot eat. And in terms of the biohacking, I really realize that women are different than men when it comes to eating and diet and exercise, but also fasting. Fasting can be a really great hack, but it's different for women. And I've done a course through Dr. Stacy Sims. I don't know if you know her. Oh my gosh, you got to find her. She's great. She is known for her TED Talk that women are not little men. And you can go Google that. And she's a researcher and she's an exercise physiologist. And she was shocked when she was told when she was first studying that, well, we don't do studies on women because we haven't figured the men out first. And she couldn't believe it. And most studies are done on men. And most studies are done on, in terms of say certain diets and fasting regimes are done on overweight men. And so she's all about athletic women. And, just not anyone who goes to a gym like just a couple times a week all the way up to the pro athlete. So anyone is considered an athlete if you just do planned exercise. And it was incredible what she presented to us in terms of the few studies that were done. Women who were athletic should not be fasting. And this is like one of the biggest biohacks. Like biohackers are all into fasting and creating autophagy and all that. Mm-hmm. And so that was a real surprise. And it makes perfect sense. And I really stress to people, especially if they're women in your audience who are exercising, they want to get fit and they're fasting. I mean, you need to fuel your body. And you've talked about this too, and in other podcasts that you've done. And I really hope this message gets to women. I just did another podcast with Nicolina Lauk, who does the glycan age. It's one of these they measure biological age. And the studies that they have is women who were, and men as well, who were overtraining and under eating. Their biological age went through the roof. Like they accelerated aging. And you're like, wait a second. What do people do when they want to lose weight? Well, they exercise a lot and they cut down their food and they eat practically nothing.
Recipe for disaster. Metabolic train wreck coming. Yep.
Total disaster. So that was my hack is don't fast.
Yeah.
If you're training.
And I love that you started this out, and we keep coming back to self-experimentation. So that's a recurring theme here. But you just mentioned we're all bio-individuals. So the advice that you shouldn't eat dairy or you shouldn't eat gluten or whatever it is, maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, because we're all a little bit different and you need to learn what works for you and what doesn't. So let's move on. So we are all bio-individuals. We need to learn what works best for us. And the ways we can do that, certainly working with someone like yourself, a health coach, a nutrition coach, you can certainly get some help in that, but really a lot of your research. Mm-hmm. So next up in your pillars, I believe, is movement. Is that right?
Yeah, movement. When we look at I want to pull back. I usually always say when we look at centenarians or people who are aging the population really well, they're moving. They didn't stop. They just keep going. And so, but my question, I kind of want to revert because I always wonder, when we study these aging populations, we look at people who are 80s, 90s, 100s, and they're hacking their age, the people who were doing well. But my question is, nobody really looks at what their lifestyle was when they were in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Like, I want to know where were they? What were they doing then? Because, some people, they just I don't know if Train with Joan. She's wonderful.
She's amazing.
We did a great podcast. She only started training at 70, right? She's 75 now. And so you can do these things in older age. Of course, it helps if you start when you're younger, but it's never too late. And when it comes to exercise, and, I'm really focused on the biohacking woman over 50 or just women over 50, let's say. And what I learned from Dr. Stacy Sims in this course, there are some exercises that are definitely key for this cohort. There's 3 of them that we talked about. One was high intensity interval training. And the next one was plyometrics, sort of explosive movements. And the third one was strength training. So these are, and strength training, I've been always talking about that with my clients too for a long time because it's just so underrated. Women always I don't want to bulk up, and you're trying to explain to them, you're not going to bulk up.
You're not. Even if you try, you're probably not. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're just scared or I don't know what. But once I get them on it, they feel so empowered. Mm-hmm. And then, the fat melts off and they're just feeling great and they feel strong. And that's what women like to be at. And it's wonderful. So those were the 3 things I have to say in terms of movement that were key for women over 50. But in general, if you're talking about aging and longevity, I always say just move. I don't care how you move. If it's just walking or if it's just, not that that's not going to be enough for certain things, but if you've never done anything, you got to move. You got to get the blood circulating. And if you like yoga, do yoga. If you like running, go running. Whatever it is that you enjoy, even if it's dancing or, you got to just do it. You're more likely to stick with it. And of course, Dr. Sachin Panda, for example, I interviewed him and he had timing, through his studies, he found out it was best to do your training in the afternoon, in the late afternoon, because you're less risk for injury. But if you try to time it like that, but if that were me, I would never do it because I need to train in the morning, get it out of the way. And if I wait until 4, I will never do it. So I always just say, choose your playground, choose whatever it is that you like and you enjoy, and you're more likely to do it. And I just encourage people to move every single day, unless you're injured or something like that. You need to take a break. And I went to the Buck Institute of Longevity in just above north of San Francisco. It's quite an interesting talk we did with Dr. Kevin Perot on Alzheimer's disease. He went through the whole gamut, and there was an interesting question in the group. And one person said, well, okay, if there's one thing to do to lower our risk of Alzheimer's, because again, we are older adults, and I'm bringing up the Alzheimer's thing because this is our concerns, right? What do we do? And he said, if there's one thing, he said, it's exercise. That's super important for the brain. You got to get blood circulation. You got to get it, into the brain. And it's not just a walk, and you need to get your heart rate up 3 or 4 times a week and, pumping it up. So you're kind of a little out of breath. So that's the way he explained it. And I just, that always stuck with me. And so for our purposes, for many, many purposes, but if you're talking about brain health, then really you got to get moving a little bit faster. And my question was, when I was doing this program, well, wait a second, what if you are 70 or 80 and you have an injury, or you have, you can't do this explosive movements, or, every time I hit, and she explained it in the sense that, there's always an alternative, especially if, you have a physical trainer who can help you. You don't need to jump on a box at 80. You can, step on a small level, and that'll get your heart rate up, if you are out of shape there, and then you progress and you get better at it. And one hack that I really think is not talked about enough, and I think maybe you might even be able to talk a bit more about it, is using, especially for those people who cannot lift heavy weights because either they're injured or they're a little bit more frail, they've never lifted weights in their life, or you're recovering from surgery. And these are BFR bands, blood flow restriction bands. Not everybody, there's contraindications, not everybody can use them, but those who can, I thought these were brilliant. And I'm thinking we need to talk more about these things with an aging population. I love them just because I'm a nomad and I don't always have heavy weights with me. And I put these bands on my arms and I feel like I take these little baby weights or I take soup cans or something, and I feel like I'm lifting a truck. It's just incredible how effective this is. It's such a simple device, but I think you need to know how to use them, where to get them. You need a little bit of advice and guidance and know if you can. Do you know anything about BFR bands?
A little. I mean, basically, BFR, blood flow restriction, really got its start with helping athletes heal quicker. So if you've got an athlete and you're paying him millions of dollars a year, you don't want him or her sidelined for very long. So BFR was very popular there, but it's, to your point, it's making its way into other populations now. It's becoming more commonly accepted, and there is new BFR technology coming out. I'm aware of at least one company that's actually making BFR clothing, where the BFR straps, for example, for arms, they would already be in place. And so it's got a couple of different applications, primarily for rehab, but also for people looking for, again, biohacking in that ultra performance. So if you're really into aesthetics, if you're a bodybuilder or something, there could be some good applications there. But yeah, that's exciting technology to watch. And I say technology, it's really pretty primitive because it is what it sounds like. If you're not familiar with BFR, you are just putting a tourniquet type device on your body somewhere in order to restrict the blood flow into that area of the body. And then you're going to work that area of the body. And to Zora's point, you don't, if you're, let's say we're talking about doing a curl. If you normally would do that with X weight, you're going to do that with half of that weight or maybe the third of that weight, because it becomes much more intense when you restrict the blood flow to that area.
Yeah.
And
it activates that growth hormone. So I think that's why the bodybuilders are really into it. And so when we're thinking about an older adult, we're thinking often about sarcopenia, and this is age-related muscle mass loss. And so, how do that's why the strength training is super important. And so 100%. Either you lift heavy stuff and you get obviously a trainer to help you with that. And that means, like in my world, you're only doing somewhere between 5 and 8 reps because it's so heavy. And that last rep is so heavy, you cannot lift it, or you can barely lift it. And you need guidance. Like you don't want to, put your back out or something because of this, but that's where the magic happens. And so with the BFR bands, the magic happens too, with a little bit of blood flow restriction. And if you're a female and you want to have not only, more muscles, but you want better skin, that natural growth hormone. I'm not talking about injecting your stuff. This is natural. Your body's producing it. Your skin, the elasticity will be better. So that's more on the beauty side, because we're concerned about those things too.
Yeah, no, that's great. So in terms of growth hormone, obviously the resistance training, what you're talking about, lifting weights, and then along with your very first pillar, sleep, right? Those things will be very synergistic with each other as you are building more muscle, and you're in deep sleep is where we're repairing muscle. And that's really where you're building muscle. In the gym, you're tearing it down. It's really during that sleep and that healthy sleep cycle that you're rebuilding that. And that's where that growth hormone is often getting pumped out. And it was Dr. Gabriel Lyon who called muscle the organ of longevity. And that's just really stuck with me. Really, really like that. So to your point, a lot of, especially older women, and it's probably a generational thing, are surprised if they come into my program, there's going to be if you're in for weight loss, there will be some version of resistance training, of weight training involved there. And very often the first thing out of a woman's mouth, say a 65-year-old woman, is, I'm not going to lift a barbell. I don't want to get bulky. I'm not trying to get huge muscles. And say, okay, let's back up and talk about this. But it really is important for aging. That's one of my favorite health hacks, is just strength training for older people. So important. And then we had hit you had hit on sarcopenia, which is that age-related muscle loss, but strength training is also fantastic for bone density, right? For improving and maintaining bone density, and osteopenia, osteoporosis as well. All right. Well, moving right along, our next pillar is going to be learning, right?
Yeah, this one was such a hard pillar to name because it's so broad, and it encompasses not only, we think of learning about the brain and brain health, but I also wanted to talk about community and your social network and your purpose in life. These are foundational. These are super important, and we often let them go or don't focus on it. And studying older adults, and, we learned a lot about loneliness and social isolation, and, older adults just disappearing in society and don't count anymore, and nobody looks at them. They feel invisible. And this is a real serious problem, because loneliness, the health impacts that has on the body is like smoking 7 packs of cigarettes a day. I mean, it's real. And it leads towards depression, and depression, this is all the stress, and then this is going to cause heart diseases and diabetes and, anything that you want, when you are in this state. And so it's really important to nurture your network. I really want people to, it's always best to do this in person, but because of COVID and many families living, miles and miles away, do the next best thing, telephone calls and FaceTimes and Facebooks and text messages. You want to have, especially as we age, there are people who say, some of the secrets of longevity is your social community. And when you get older, you want to make sure someone's got your back, like in case something happens, or somebody's checking in on you, or, you have an issue, and who can you rely on? Who can be your confidant? And if we don't nurture that network, we really are going to find ourselves in a hole. And unfortunately, men are not as good as nurturing that network as women are. Women are programmed for survival, for our children. We make these connections because we want to protect our children and ourselves. It's just sort of ingrained in our DNA. And so that when something happens, we know who to go to, and we have help with that. And so very often when you have an older couple, say, and the wife dies and the husband survives, the husband doesn't have that network very often. Not everybody, but this is what the study's been showing so far. Is that network is gone, especially if he's retired. Because when you were working, then you had that community. And then once you're retired, you depend on your spouse to do all the networking for you. And so then what happens if she's gone? Then you spiral out of control, and very often they die right after the other. So you really want to nurture that network, that community, and that social aspect is vital to your health.
I love this pillar, and it's one, frankly, that I don't give enough thought to in my personal life, and also in what I talk about and how I talk to my clients. But remaining engaged mentally, intellectually, but most important, emotionally and socially is so critical. And as you were just talking there about wives dying before their husbands and social circles, and I'm only 58 and I'm already guilty of that. I still have a good social network because I do this, and I do have coworkers and people there, but my social calendar is pretty much 100% run by my wife. And I suppose that's just happened by default. But that's a good point. I haven't really considered that. So I need to take that back from this and give that some thought. But certainly I can see, I think we can all see, right, as we look at that aging, especially our 70s, 80s, and 90-year-old population, where that can really become an issue. When you drive by any old folks' home, there's plenty of parking there. It's not, people aren't parked out on the streets because the parking lot's full. And that's a scary, sad place to be, right? If you're, already in declining health, and then you're socially isolated, you're emotionally isolated, and these can have some dramatic impacts on our health, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What's interesting, I learned, is that I think it's only between 3 and 5% of the population in the U.S. are in nursing homes or in these communities, and I thought it was a lot higher. And it's mostly surprising because they're extremely expensive and nobody can afford them. And also a lot of people want to age in place. So there's a lot of work being done right now on how can we keep older adults in their homes where they're comfortable, but independent. And, because it becomes that, when they're not independent when they're not independent anymore, that's when the problems happen. So there's a lot of technology that's coming out, which is great. A lot of research is coming out, which is wonderful to be able to support older adults as they age, and including me, right? Like who knows what's going to happen to us. So it's one of those things we want to keep people in their homes where they have their communities. Now, when you think about, if it depends a lot where you're living too, so if you are living in a suburb far away from services, and if your family's gone, and then imagine your driver's license taken away, and there is no bus or transportation. So this is where a lot of people can get socially isolated and lonely very quickly. And I want people to be clear a little bit, social isolation and loneliness are two very different things. So you can be surrounded by tons of people, but feel lonely. And you can be completely isolated socially and you're not lonely. So it's the problem is when you really feel lonely. That's the thing, so that's the key. So you don't want to have that feeling of loneliness no matter where you are. And it's very easy to get lonely when you are socially isolated and far away and don't have access. So this is where sometimes, you think, well, is my parent better off in a community, in assisted living, or, some other kind of long-term care? Depends on, their illnesses, if they have any, or is it better we come up with some other solution? And there's not, one that's better than the other. We always oftentimes think, I don't never want to go to a home, but some people actually thrive in them. So if you can afford them or, it's something, I don't want to stigmatize or anything. It is what it is. And you have to decide if that's good or not so good for you. But there's so many things we don't consider, we don't understand. I mean, both of my parents have passed away, so I don't have this issue, but I understand it. And it's something that's definitely happening in your and my generation, and people who are probably listening to this, they may have older parents in their 80s who they are dealing with. And so, how do you make that decision to keep them active and in their community? Because they will go real fast downhill if you take that away from them. And so you want to support that. And then, of course, when you get that age, you want to make sure that you're in a good position. How can you plan for that? We don't really think about these things, but we need to plan. And that's why you nurture your network now in your 50s, so that by the time you hit your 80s, you have that set, because you're not going to, move to a new place and start making new friends real fast. I mean, it takes time to build these solid relationships. So, I mean, not that it can't happen, but most of the time you want to make sure that happens.
Yeah. So, and as you're talking about this and kind of the later stages of life and how we can remain healthy, specifically from an emotional, social health, and stave off loneliness, etc., it occurs to me that everything we've talked about today, all these biohacking tips that you're talking about, is the best way to prepare for that. And the best way to prepare for that is to start today, right? And take these small steps and start building these into the very fabric of your life, so that you can age, so we can have that longer health span. And we talked about the compression morbidity earlier. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. Now you have what you call, I think it's a bonus pillar. Is that right?
Yeah.
So our Beautify, let's talk to us about that.
Yeah. Beautify is the bonus pillar because it's not essential for aging, having a long health span. There's plenty of people who don't, don't care what they look like. And that's fine too. So, but I'm a little vain. So I am going to try to extend the health span of my skin and my hair and my nails. And I'd like to take care of myself from the outside too. And I did this very interesting series of talks in Hong Kong when I was living there. And I had doctors come to talk about each of these pillars. And for the Beautify pillar, I had a Chinese medicine doctor come on, and she did a very interesting presentation. And she said, she explained really when you are on the outside taking care of yourself, it will affect you on the inside as well. You'll feel better. Your disposition will be better. You'll be in a better mood. And goes vice versa, right? When you're happy on the inside and things are going well, it reflects on the outside. So we don't want to, poo-poo the beauty thing because it does affect your health. And I've even heard some people who have older parents who have been depressed and then they stop taking care of themselves. And then once they start to comb their hair again and shower and practice self-hygiene, they know they're going to be all right because they get back on track and they're back in themselves. So it really is not just about being vain. It's just it does affect your mood a lot. So when it comes to, I think the most popular concern in terms of older women is our skin. And we want to keep our skin healthy looking and youthful because the signs and symptoms of aging are typically the deep wrinkles and saggy jowls and these 11 lines and liver spots. And these are things that make us look older. And I just wish I could embrace it all. And maybe I will one day because I'd probably save a lot of time and money. So, but until then, I will practice as much as I can to take care of my skin. And I think if there's one takeaway to have for this is to, again, it's all about prevention, is use sunscreen. And I meet too many women, and I'm here in Spain and Portugal, and so many women my age, they're not using sunscreen, or they'll go, I don't sunbathe, or I only use it when I go out on sunny days. You need sunscreen every single day if you don't want those wrinkles to form. It's those UVA rays that are aging you. Remember, A for aging. But when you get a sunscreen or something, make sure it has UVA and UVB. The sun will break down your collagen. That's leading to saggy skin and your wrinkles. So really, that's such a simple thing to do. You don't need to spend a lot of money on it. And again, that's 85% of the way. Like, just don't do the damage in the first place. But if there's just one of them to take away, protect your skin from the sun. And if you're one of those who are like, I don't know, chemical sunscreens or mineral sunscreens, and I don't want all the chemicals in my skin absorbing it, that's an issue. There's so much stuff out there that's just more, say, organic. You can research this stuff to death, or just even do a quick search, and you'll find stuff has less chemicals on it. But you're doing more damage by not putting on the sunscreen than just putting it on, no matter what it is. Just do it. Do whatever it is that feels good and makes you and protects your skin, and then you could figure it out later on what is the best one that works for you.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask you next when you said use sunscreen. I said, well, do you have some recommendations there? Because most of that or a lot of what's on the market is, you want to be careful what you put on your skin because it's going to go through this skin blood barrier, and what you put on your skin, you put in you. And a lot of what's out there is, frankly, it's close to toxic if you're using it daily. You're microdosing poisons. So a little bit of research goes a long ways there. There are healthy options out there. Of course, there's a lot of technology for covering your skin as well. I live at the coast. I spend a lot of time at the beach and on the water, and certainly covering is another way to take care of your skin in the sun, but certainly want to be aware of that. Well, Zora, we've gone on here for quite some time with lots of great advice for folks to help them age healthy and happy. Let me ask you this. What's next for you? What's on the horizon?
Well, I am on the biohacking circuit, and I'm speaking in Boston at the Biohacking Congress in June 11th and 12th. So that's sort of up my alley now, because I'm going to graduate in May, and then I'll be in the US. Then I'll be on that, circuit speaking as well on different conferences. And I've got a new program coming out and I'm working on, and I keep adding to it. That's why it's taking so long, is called the Energy Reboot program for women over 50, because that's one of the biggest complaints that we have is I have no energy. I can't do all the exercise and prepare my food and do everything I need to be doing if I don't have the energy for it. So we're hacking their energy, and that's coming out in a couple of months. And you can go to the hackmyage.com website and put on the wait list if you would like. But it's coming, and I'm so excited to share that program with you. It's just an online program where you watch some videos. I'll be inviting some speakers as well, talk about hormones, because, program without hormones for women over 50 is not a program.
Yeah.
Then we'll have some Q&A, some live sessions, and homework, and just to get your energy back up. So that's kind of what's in the near future.
Okay, that sounds exciting. If folks can check that out, certainly at hackmyage.com. You have a podcast. We've referenced that. That's also Hack My Age. And how else can people connect with you? I'm sure you're all over social, right?
All over the social media. So if you can't remember Hack My Age, you can Google Zora the Explorer. It's much easier to remember. And I am on Facebook, Instagram. I'm very well connected. I'm on there all the time, and I answer your questions, so don't hesitate to ask. And of course, Twitter and the website are probably the best ways to reach out to me. And I have actually a Facebook group called Biohacking Women 50 Plus. So if you are a woman around the age of 50 or older, then you're more than welcome to join our group. We talk all about all these hacks and just great conversations there. And I'm also on Clubhouse, same thing, Biohacking Women 50 Plus. And that's always a fun medium. Do you ever do Clubhouse?
I've not ventured into Clubhouse at all. No.
Oh, okay. We'll have to come join us.
Yeah, maybe. I'm struggling with before we started recording, we were joking about, I'm already struggling with the limited social media that I'm doing here. So, yeah. But I guess I shouldn't let age be an excuse, should I?
Nope.
Absolutely not. We addressed that before we started recording as well. All right. Well, Zora, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing just your inspiring story, your passion, and your wisdom with us. You are a fantastic ambassador for healthy aging, and I just wish you all the best and encourage you to keep up the great work.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really enjoying your podcast too, and we'll have to have you on as well.
Okay, folks, that's our show for this week. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. You can find all the links to the resources we discussed in this episode over at silveredgefitness.com/episode 115. And you can continue the conversation over there as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on today's show. As we wrap up our time together today, you can show your support for this show in two important ways. The first is to tell a friend about this podcast and encourage them to give it a listen. The second is to give this podcast a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, and be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. I also want to let you know that if you've enjoyed this podcast, I have other free resources over at silveredgefree.com. There you'll find my guides with my top tips on exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle. So feel free to head over there and download anything that looks useful to you and your health and wellness journey. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today, and until next time, stay strong.